A man walked up to Carol Wayne once, just a fan, someone who'd watched her on television and understood what he was seeing. He told her it took a very smart woman to have such brilliant comic timing. Her eyes filled with tears, and she pulled him into a hug, because in all her years working inside the entertainment industry, nobody there had ever said those words to her. That fan recognized something Johnny Carson's entire operation refused to acknowledge for nearly 2 decades. About her death, the autopsy found nothing. No drugs, no alcohol, no definitive evidence of foul play. There won't be a breathless reveal here about what the medical examiner discovered, because there's nothing to reveal. The emptiness of that report is itself the indictment. Carol Wayne appeared dozens of times on The Tonight Show as the Matinee Lady, was the most recurring female face on the biggest show in American television history, and died broke, unrecognized, and uninvestigated. Because Carson's operation had spent years teaching America she was a body, not a person. And nobody demands justice for a body. Johnny Carson wielded more soft power than most senators, and more hard power over entertainment careers than any studio chief. The Tonight Show wasn't simply a television program. It was the last shared ritual of the American evening, the thing tens of millions of households surrendered to after the local news signed off. They absorbed the monologue, the banter with Ed McMahon, the parade of comedians and musicians and actors who crossed that stage hoping Carson's attention might transform their lives. When Carson liked a performer, doors opened. When he didn't, they closed and stayed closed. NBC understood what it had and protected it accordingly. The Tonight Show was the network's most reliable profit center for decades. Carson understood his position even more clearly. By the early 1980s, his personal fortune was vast and growing. His power to elevate careers carried a symmetrical capacity to end them. When Carson lost interest in a performer, when the show's sensibilities shifted, when someone stopped being useful to the machine, there was no formal termination. His inattention was enough. Careers didn't end with a phone call. They ended with a phone that stopped ringing. Nobody explained why. Nobody needed to. Into this gravitational field in 1967 stepped Carol Wayne. She was born Carol Marie Wayne on September 6, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois. She and her sister Nina grew up with performing in their blood, drawn to stages early, absorbing the lesson that the spotlight offered one of the few arenas where women in mid-century America could claim space on their own terms. Both sisters eventually made their way to Las Vegas, where they worked as showgirls in a city that was, even by the standards of that era, nakedly transactional about the female body. Vegas was the sequined entry point into the entertainment machine, a place where women were hired for their appearance, evaluated on their appearance, and discarded when the next appearance walked in the door. But Vegas gave Carol Wayne something the system never intended her to have. Standing in chorus lines under hot lights, night after night, she absorbed the mechanics of comic timing, how an audience breathes, where the silence before a laugh lives, how long you can stretch that silence before tension tips into discomfort, and the exact instant to let it go. Those instincts sharpened over thousands of hours of live performance into a sensitivity to rhythm as rare and exacting as perfect pitch. She built these skills in a context deliberately designed to ensure nobody would notice she had them. Before Carson's show changed everything, Wayne assembled the kind of career available to a beautiful young woman with comedic instincts in 1960s Hollywood. Blake Edwards cast her in his 1968 film, The Party, alongside Peter Sellers, an anarchic comedy built on the collision between sophistication and apparent cluelessness. Guest spots on programs like Mannix followed in 1972, along with small film roles, the kind of work that gives a resume the appearance of momentum without providing any real velocity. During those years, she could be seen. She wasn't known. She was a comedian waiting for a vehicle large enough to matter. On February 26, 1967, she made her first appearance on The Tonight Show. Carson, who possessed an almost preternatural instinct for what worked on camera, saw something useful in her and brought her back. He kept bringing her back. Over the following years, Wayne became the Matinee Lady in the Art Fern Tea Time movie sketches, one of Carson's most enduring recurring bits. He played Art Fern, a sleazy, pompadoured late-night movie host who pitched absurd products and delivered innuendos with exaggerated relish. Wayne stood beside him as his assistant, voluptuous and seemingly dim, pointing at products, reacting to Fern's jokes with wide-eyed bewilderment, inhabiting the frame as an object the audience was invited to admire while Carson supplied the words. Her appearances spanned 1971 to 1984. The commonly cited figure among fans who remember her holds that she appeared on The Tonight Show over 100 times. At least one research source puts the confirmed count at 38, still an extraordinary number for a recurring sketch performer on a nightly talk show, but dramatically lower than legend suggests. The gap tells its own story. Wayne was so vivid on screen, so deeply embedded in the texture of those late-night hours, that viewers' memories expanded her presence far beyond the actual tally. When she appeared, she registered with a permanence that outlasted the broadcast. She was, in the most concrete sense of the word, unforgettable. Carson's industry forgot her anyway. Every beat of the Art Fern sketch depended on Wayne's comic gifts. The timing of a sidelong glance at the camera, a precisely calibrated pause before reacting to one of Fern's double entendres. Not too fast, which would have killed the joke, and not too slow, which would have let the energy drain from the room. Her physical comedy demanded the physical awareness that let her find the one angle that made a sight gag land. Strip Wayne out of Art Fern, and the sketch disintegrates into a man in a bad wig talking to himself. Carson knew this. He understood comedy with the analytical precision of an engineer studying load-bearing structures, and he understood that Wayne bore a significant portion of the load in his most popular recurring bit. He never said so publicly. Not once. Ed McMahon, Carson's sidekick for decades, the man who sat beside that stage watching every performer cross the floor, described Wayne in his memoir, Here's Johnny, with a sentence so revealing it reads almost like an inadvertent confession on behalf of the institution. McMahon wrote that Art Fern was smart enough to have beside him a sometime, well, really almost no-time actress named Carol Wayne, a young woman who had received more than her share of physical gifts. 3 reductions packed into a single clause. Wayne was, almost no time, an actress. Her purpose was defined entirely by what Art Fern was smart enough to position next to himself, and her signature characteristic was possessing more than her share of something McMahon didn't need to specify, because Carson's entire apparatus had already trained the audience to know what it meant. McMahon wasn't being deliberately cruel. He was faithfully reproducing the institutional lens, Carson's lens, NBC's lens, the industry's collective lens, through which Wayne had been viewed for her entire career. She was a body that happened to stand near comedy. Academic literature on the era applied the same framework with scholarly precision. Scholars grouped Wayne with performers like Maureen Arthur and Lee Meredith, women who made careers enacting the archetype of the dumb, sexy blonde on television talk shows and variety programs. Enacting, performing, creating, deploying intelligence and timing and physical craft in the service of appearing to possess none of those qualities. A description of artistry that the vocabulary itself refuses to name as art. Carson's show weaponized this paradox every time Wayne appeared. She performed brilliance wrapped in the costume of stupidity, and the entire structure around her, the writing, the camera framing, the publicity, the critical reception, treated the costume as the reality. Carson controlled that structure more completely than any host in television history. He had the authority and the platform to reframe her publicly, to say on camera what was happening 3 feet in front of him every time she nailed a reaction shot. He never did. The framing served his show. It served the sketch. It served NBC's bottom line. It didn't serve Carol Wayne, but serving Carol Wayne was never part of the architecture. Their relationship extended beyond the professional, by Wayne's own account. Her description of it carries genuine tenderness alongside something harder to name, an awareness of profound asymmetry she accepted, but may never have fully endorsed. "He loves me," she said. "I love him. It's an understanding, a given." An understanding, a given. Language belonging to someone who didn't write the terms of the arrangement she inhabited. Wayne occupied a precarious orbit, close enough to feel his gravitational warmth, never secure enough to be shielded by it when the temperature dropped. One exchange between them aired on national television and became, in retrospect, the most unbearable 30 seconds in her entire public record. Carson, during an on-air moment, told Wayne, "Someday you'll be 47. Wayne smiled. "I hope so." She died at 42. Millions heard that exchange and laughed. It was a comedy show. The line was built to play as a gentle joke about aging. She voiced the simplest human aspiration, to reach 47, to keep living, to still be here a few years from now, and fell 5 years short. Through the early 1980s, the machine that had made Wayne a fixture began grinding in reverse. Art Fern sketches grew less frequent as Carson's show evolved. Wayne's bookings thinned, then ceased. Carson's empire advanced into a new decade. Wayne didn't advance with it. Her career had never established independent footing outside his gravitational field. Guest spots, small film roles, Las Vegas nightclub work, none generated the kind of momentum that builds lasting financial stability. She was a recurring sketch player on someone else's show, paid per appearance, holding no ownership stake in the material she brought to life, and receiving no residual income when those sketches re-aired. NBC profited from every Art Fern segment. Every night, Wayne's presence held viewers through a commercial break, added revenue to the network's ledger. Carson's personal fortune expanded in parallel with the show's earnings. Wayne's didn't. By January 1985, the most prominent recurring female performer on the biggest show in American television history was broke. The mechanics were grimly straightforward. No residuals, no continuing contract, no institutional safety net. She had fed a revenue machine that generated enormous revenue for NBC and walked away with nothing that endured. One viewer's observation pins the disparity without flinching. Johnny had millions. He could have stepped in to help that dear, sweet girl. No evidence exists that Carson ever did. His sketch partner of more than a decade was in financial distress, and the man whose signature character she'd made viable for 13 years held wealth that several lifetimes couldn't deplete. Either he didn't know, meaning the system around him rendered performers like Wayne invisible even to the man who stood arm's length from her under studio lights, or he knew and chose inaction. Both roads lead to the same structural truth. Carson's operation was built to extract value from people like Carol Wayne. Returning value was never part of the design. Carson didn't manufacture this system from nothing. Hollywood had been processing talented women through identical machinery for generations. Women like Jane Mansfield and Mamie Van Doren had walked this path before Wayne. But Wayne's case cuts with particular sharpness because the proof of her intelligence aired in millions of living rooms week after week. Reaction shots timed to the microsecond, pauses held at precisely the right duration. physical comedy performed with the spatial awareness of a dancer. The talent was right there on screen, visible to anyone paying attention. Carson's industry chose, collectively and without hesitation, to look past it. They looked at her body and treated everything else as background noise. In January 1985, Carol Wayne flew to Manzanillo, Mexico. She was 42 years old, broke, and accompanied by a man named Edward Durston. Durston was the last person seen with Carol Wayne alive. He'd traveled with her to Manzanillo and was her companion during her final days in a coastal town, far removed from anyone who might have been watching out for her. After Wayne disappeared, Durston flew back to the United States. He took her luggage with him. Her bags, personal effects, potential evidence, the material remnants of her life, crossed the border in his possession, removed entirely from the Mexican jurisdiction where her body would soon surface. Whether he packed her belongings out of panic, routine, guilt, or deliberation can't be determined from public sources. That he took them is undisputed. From the United States, having already left Mexico, Durston filed a missing persons report for Carol Wayne. The timeline makes this gesture difficult to read as simple concern. He was the last person who saw her alive. He knew her location because he'd been there with her. Filing a report for a woman whose final whereabouts you personally witnessed creates a paper trail that positions the filer as cooperative and worried. It answered questions nobody had publicly raised and displaced harder questions that might otherwise have landed on the person doing the filing. Durston was connected to a second woman who died under suspicious circumstances. Specifics of this case remain sparse in the accessible record, but observers noted the pattern without equivocation. Too coincidental he was in connection with two women dying tragically. Wayne reportedly couldn't swim and actively avoided water. A woman who doesn't swim and steers clear of water doesn't end up submerged in a shallow bay through ordinary carelessness. Through a misstep on a dock, an impulsive wade into surf, the mundane accidents that drowning rulings typically rely on. The detail doesn't prove foul play. It does make the absence of a thorough investigation enormously more conspicuous. The available record shows no indication that Durston was ever charged with any crime connected to Wayne's death. He remained surrounded by unanswered questions and untouched by legal consequence, carrying the weight of circumstances that nobody with investigative authority ever made him explain. The original video covering Wayne's death displayed a photograph of actor Sam Waterston while discussing Durston, and the audience caught the error immediately. Every detail in this account is attached to the correct individual, because honoring Carol Wayne's intelligence requires honoring the intelligence of the people who carry her memory. Wayne's body was found in a shallow bay near Santiago, Manzanillo. Mexican authorities performed an autopsy. No drugs in her system, no alcohol, no definitive physical indicators of foul play. The official ruling was drowning. But how a woman who couldn't swim and avoided water ended up dead in a shallow bay, with nothing in her bloodstream to account for impaired judgment, was left wholly unexplained. Wayne's own sister reportedly stated that a drug and alcohol overdose led to the drowning. The official autopsy directly contradicts this, having found no substances in her system. A separate, unverified claim holds that no water was found in Wayne's lungs. 3 accounts exist. None align. None can be definitively confirmed from available evidence. The conflict itself is a product of an investigation that never finished the work it started. Mexican police classified the death as accidental drowning and closed the case. No institutional force, not NBC, not the production apparatus, not the network of wealth and influence surrounding the most powerful man in late-night television, mobilized to demand answers. A woman who had been one of the most recognizable female faces on American television for more than a decade died under deeply suspicious circumstances in a foreign country, and the institutional response amounted to paperwork filed and drawers shut. No public statement from Carson about Wayne's death survives in the readily available historical record. No on-air acknowledgement. No Tonight Show tribute to the woman who'd anchored one of his most beloved sketches from 1971 to 1984. As far as the accessible record shows, the most powerful voice in American entertainment went silent about the suspicious death of his own recurring performer. NBC never mobilized to demand answers about what happened to her. The Tonight Show aired the following evening, and the one after that. The machine kept producing because it had never processed Carol Wayne as anything other than a replaceable component. Perhaps he grieved privately. Perhaps the machinery of celebrity and its handlers ensured silence. But the observable outcome of private grief and the observable outcome of total indifference are indistinguishable. A void where accountability should have been. He commanded a platform reaching tens of millions of American households nightly. He held wealth that could have funded a private investigation 10 times over. A single on-air sentence about Wayne's death would have forced Mexican and American authorities to re-examine the case under national scrutiny. He deployed none of these capabilities. His most consistent female sketch partner died under suspicious, uninvestigated circumstances, and the man whose comedy she had anchored for over a decade chose silence over every available alternative. Carson hosted his final Tonight Show. Retrospectives for years afterward cataloged his genius, his timing, his influence on American broadcasting. Carol Wayne appeared in virtually none of them. She'd been the performer who made Art Fern work, the woman whose timing elevated a sketch from amusing to iconic over 13 years of collaboration. And in the official narrative of Johnny Carson's career, she occupied the space between footnotes. Alive, she was a body on Carson's stage, profitable, visible, unacknowledged as a creative force. Dead, she was a wire service paragraph, briefly noted, promptly forgotten. The transition from one status to the other required no coordination, no conspiracy, no institutional directive. Indifference did all the work. An industry that trains itself for decades to see a woman as decoration doesn't need to organize silence when she dies. Silence is the default. Decorations don't receive eulogies. A man walked up to Carol Wayne once and told her she was smart, and she cried. She cried because nobody inside the industry that profited from her brilliance, not the producers, not the network, not the writers who built sketches around her timing, not the host who called what they had an understanding, had ever acknowledged what a stranger in a crowd could plainly see. She spent her career performing intelligence for millions, while every institution surrounding her denied she possessed any. Carson watched her work from 3 feet away for 13 years. He watched her find every beat, hold every pause, calibrate every reaction with the precision of someone who understood comedy in her bones. When she died, broke and alone in Mexico under circumstances that made no logical sense, he offered nothing. No words, no resources, no demand for answers from the authorities of either country. His show had used her talent. His network had banked her contributions. His sidekick had reduced her to almost no time, an actress in a published memoir. And when the machinery's logical conclusion arrived, a woman consumed by an industry that saw only her body, turning up dead while nobody with power thought she warranted scrutiny, Carson, who had the means and the platform and the authority to change that outcome, chose to say nothing at all. Her name was Carol Marie Wayne, born September 6, 1942, Chicago. Died January 1985, Manzanillo, Mexico. 42 years old, 5 short of 47. She warranted professional recognition, financial security, and a real investigation into her death, and received none of these from the man and the institution that owed her the most. Subscribe for more stories like this one.